Okay, it looks like we have a good group of people on with us now, so we will go ahead and get started. First and foremost, thank you everyone for joining us today for our Future of Work with Microsoft webinar. My name is Jessie Dominic. I am part of the InterVision marketing team. Rob Spitzer, who is joining us today, will be our main speaker. He is our director of Microsoft Cloud, part of our professional services team. But prior to him diving into his presentation, I just want to take a moment to review a couple of housekeeping items. So first and foremost, we do want to invite you to feel free to utilize the Q&A feature that you can find at the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. Feel free to submit questions throughout the session, and we will be sure to answer all of them at the end. And additionally, we are going to be recording this session, so we will be sure that we get you a copy of that recording by first thing tomorrow morning at the latest. That's all I had. So now I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Rob.
Okay, great. And just to make sure you can hear me okay, right?
Yes, you sound great.
All right, awesome. Well, yeah, as Jesse said, my name is Rob Spitzer. I head up the Microsoft Professional Services team here at InterVision. I've been part of InterVision for 17 years, and I've been working on Microsoft technologies for around 20. So um, my time with Microsoft goes back prior to the cloud, and then when Microsoft pivoted into the cloud, we did accordingly. Um, we wanted today to talk about just the ever-changing landscape of work. I think it's fairly safe to say everybody's normal has changed over the last few years. Um, we've all gotten used to working remotely or working partially remote or hybrid kind of configurations. This was the COVID acted as a catalyst for this, but really it was changes that were already coming. In fact, a lot of the folks on this call, being from the IT organization, probably were leading that charge. I know personally, I've been doing partial or total remote work for years now, whether it's helping customers or doing presentations like this. It has just become the direction we're going. And in fact, a recent survey showed around 73% of workers prefer to work remotely, at least part-time, where it makes sense. I'm pretty excited because I feel like my kids are going to be that first generation that get to decide where they're going to work and where they're going to live. And those don't necessarily have to be the same place, which is just kind of an exciting change from where we've been in the past. Now, in order to do that, the tools we use need to evolve along with the work styles. We need better collaboration. We need better flexibility on how we can access data. And then, of course, overall, we need to keep that more secure. The goal of this presentation isn't to go through every cloud offering Microsoft has. What I really want to do is kind of look at trends that we have seen that have been pretty hot over the last year or so. Some of these things you may already be doing or maybe looking into, but there may be a few additional items that you haven't thought about or really just kind of pique your interest. As Jesse mentioned, as I'm going through, just please feel free to jot down any questions. This will probably run about 35 to 40 minutes, so there'll be plenty of time at the end for any questions. So just like I said, just make sure you make some notes and we'll go from there. And so again, my goal is to just go through some trends. So let's start where it makes the most sense, which is on the security front. As we kind of move more and more into this cloud first world, one of the benefits, of course, of it is we get anytime, anywhere access to our data. One of the negatives is there's anytime, anywhere access to our data, and we need to make sure we have a more secure platform and a secure environment to support that. One of the questions we got early in the pandemic was, how in the world do we handle machines in this disparate kind of spread out world? Prior to the pandemic, we've had tools on premise, things like Config Manager or other tools that were based in the office, or the office may have just been small enough that the IT organization could roam around and directly interface with everybody in the organization. As folks started to go home, work remotely, work hybrid, that became a bigger and bigger problem. And so again, customers started to look at how could we manage these machines that are living everywhere? And one of the big tools in the Microsoft toolbox for this is Intune. Intune is Microsoft's endpoint management tool. It can be used for not only managing Windows machines, but also as a mobile device management platform for like iOS and Android. And it can allow things like pushing applications, pushing security policies, managing endpoint security solutions like Defender. It can even go as far as locking data to particular applications. So in the case of like a smartphone, maybe you want to keep people from being able to copy sensitive data from Outlook out to Facebook or something like that. You can kind of build those digital fences within the applications. So we've seen a big push around Intune and that mobile device management piece to really kind of try to secure those endpoints as they've gotten outside of the office. We've also need to have better controls just around how users can access data. This was not totally driven by this move to cloud first computing, but rather just the security postures becoming a bigger deal, whether you're dealing with cyber insurance or maybe you have direct compliancy requirements, or maybe you don't have any compliance requirements directly, but maybe you work with a customer who has compliancy requirements and in turn dictates those onto you. And so Microsoft provides a full suite of tools to help with that. Things like data loss prevention, conditional access, and just a whole suite of tools around that. Those tools can not only be used for locking down access to things like email, but also data that lives in SharePoint, OneDrive, Teams, and the whole Office 365 suite. Again, as we kind of get into this anytime, anywhere access, securing identities has become a bigger deal. In the past, an identity lived in an Active Directory environment behind a corporate firewall. So unless you could get onto a machine in the office, your identity was pretty safe. Fast forward, I can get there from wherever I happen to be logged in at the moment. And so maintaining control of that identity becomes a more important deal. And tools like Azure MFA can help with that, providing additional factors of authentication. Microsoft provides several. So you can do kind of the traditional text message. You can even do a voice call where you get prompted at a predetermined number to verify your identity. They have an authenticator app, like most other providers do as well. And then that can be expanded to not only Microsoft's Office 365 products, but other applications through Azure SSO. So we've not only helped folks put Azure MFA in front of things like Office 365, but other places where there's entrance into the network. For instance, we can set up Azure AD SSO with most VPN solutions. So any Cisco AnyConnect, for instance, we can put it in front of Citrix. We can implement it with other third-party web applications through things like Cloud App Security. And we can, with that kind of Azure MFA configuration you've already put in place, it can be extended pretty easily out to other applications without having to go invest in an additional MFA tool or anything like that. The last trend we've seen in security has been around persistent security. One of the issues that has always existed in IT is we can build pretty solid security environments, file servers, for instance, that have got very complicated permission structures in place, things like that. The problem with those have always been the security didn't persist. So maybe I can legitimately get to a file because I have the particular permissions, but if I take that file and accidentally or purposely attach it to an email, for instance, that security doesn't persist. And now I could send it to somebody that maybe is not authorized to get to that data. Azure Information Protection allows us to put persistent security on various files. That persistent security can not only control who can access data, So maybe you want to make an Excel spreadsheet that's locked down to just your organization, for instance. You can do things like that. But you can also control what they can do with the data. Maybe you only want it to be viewed. You don't want it to be copied or printed or anything like that. You can even go as far as like time bombing data. So if a file, maybe it's a it's a scope that's good for 30 days or something like that. You could time bomb that file so it's no longer usable after that period of time. And these are just, like I said, not the full suite of the Microsoft security tools, but the ones we've really seen a lot of interest in as more and more data is put out in Office 365 and other third-party cloud systems. The second um, the second trend we've really seen is around collaboration. And honestly, this was one of the first things out the door as folks went home from the pandemic. We saw a big uptick in the use of Teams early in the early days of COVID. And what was driving a lot of that was customers were looking for easy ways to collaborate, whether it was one-to-one instant messages or uh, group chats, audio, video conferencing, things like that. And a lot of folks who were using Office 365 found they had this tool available to them and pretty easily could roll that out. What a lot of customers weren't aware of, though, until they got into it deeper, is there was more that you could do, specifically in the telephony space around Teams. So one of the questions that came up um, during this kind of shift to remote and hybrid work was, well, we've been able to kind of support everybody remotely for the most part, but the receptionist still has to go into the office because the phone system is literally glued to the wall in the office. And the only way for the receptionist to answer the phone is to be in the office. Hey, it would be great if there was a way to kind of have that same anytime, anywhere access to our phone system that we've gotten used to with things like email. Is that possible? And the answer to that question is yes, with cloud voice solutions like Teams phone system. So with Teams phone system, you can actually use Teams as a cloud PBX, where basically the entire phone system lives in the cloud. And anywhere that you have an endpoint, whether that's Teams or a hardware handset, you can not only receive calls, but make calls using your work number. So that had a couple great benefits for customers. The first was the receptionist scenario I laid out. The receptionist could now work from home, answer the main line of an office, and then transfer calls to other employees in the organization that were also working in their houses. But it also allows kind of that hybrid workforce to really hit its stride as well. So for instance, we use personal cell phones. Maybe I don't want to give out my personal cell phone number. With the Teams app, I can not only receive calls made to my InterVision phone, but I can make calls from that and they will come from my InterVision number as well. So it allows me to kind of have that bring your own device world without really having to totally mix my personal life and my business life together. There's also a full suite of conferencing tools built into Teams. Again, a lot of that is part of the kind of the base level, but you can extend that to include things like audio conferencing. And as customers have been moving back into the office, one of the things they're now looking at is, well, shoot, how do we do Teams meetings in our conference spaces? And Microsoft works with a number of third-party partners to provide conferencing solutions for various room sizes, everything from small huddle rooms up to executive conference rooms. They've basically taken a page from how they handle PCs for how they handle Teams. In other words, a particular vendor can make whatever piece of hardware they want, kind of what can decide on what the form factor looks like, et cetera. But the actual device then runs the Teams app. So the software running on top of the devices is consistent from vendor to vendor. So if you put a Crestron system in one office and a Poly system in another, the user experience will be very similar. You just kind of pick what system makes the most sense for that particular size office. What's really kind of cool is most of the Teams room systems not only support one button to join to Teams meetings, but they also support one button to join to Zoom and WebEx meetings. So if you're dealing with customers or business partners that are using other platforms, you can still utilize that Teams room system there as well. The third trend we saw kind of pop up during all of this was around file shares. So again, we got used to pre-pandemic days of email being available anytime, anywhere. But for the most part, we were all kind of comfortable with the idea of our files just live in an F drive, and that F drive is in the office. And that was okay, especially when we were going in the office 40 hours a week. If we couldn't really get to a file when we were at home, that wasn't a big deal. You could just get it tomorrow, or in a pinch, you could fire up the VPN and connect into the office and get to your files. Once everybody kind of went home, this got a little bit tougher. Things like the VPN just couldn't handle that many clients connecting to it. Customers were looking at beefing up the number of VPN connections or the internet connection in the office. And one of the questions that came up at that time was, it'd be really great if there was kind of an anytime, anywhere solution to file sharing like there is for email. And the answer to that in the Microsoft world was really twofold: SharePoint and OneDrive. OneDrive is Microsoft's personal file storage solution. So think things like My Documents or maybe home directories, things like that. And then SharePoint. SharePoint really is the repository for like the corporate data. So things like an F drive or a G drive or other corporate file structure. Similar to on-premise, we can build out permissions that kind of match the organizational need. There's even tools available to lift and shift data from file sharers out to the cloud. But one of the really kind of nice things that comes with this is not only do you immediately get that anytime, anywhere access to that data, but you also get some new tools at your disposal as well. So things like co-authoring, for instance. If you're not familiar with co-authoring just allows multiple folks to work on a file simultaneously. So for an example, this presentation, there's typically multiple people involved in putting something like this together. In the old days, what we would do is somebody would start the template, send it an email to the first person would make their changes, send it to the next, so on and so forth till we got to the end. Somewhere along the way, somebody would have realized they needed to make a change. Now we've got a problem with two versions of the file floating around, and worse, usually the person at the tail end has got all of about 2 minutes to get done what they need to get done because everybody else took a little bit too long. With co-authoring, we don't have to do that. We can all work on the same file. So I could be in there working on my piece, Jesse could be working on hers. We could all be doing that simultaneously. Now, that scares a lot of folks because they're like, isn't that an opportunity for things to get messed up? It is, but one of the other things that kind of comes with these modern file sharing tools is version control and version history. So we can always roll back. Multiple versions are kept as these files are being changed, and so we can always compare, roll back as needed. The other benefit you get with moving out to Office 365 and SharePoint and OneDrive for your data are those security tools I mentioned early on are just inherently in front of these. So if you build things like DLP rules, they're not only going to apply to email, but they'll apply to data in SharePoint and OneDrive. MFA, if you've put that in place, that will apply to SharePoint and OneDrive as well. So again, just a lot of that, you get a lot of kind of benefit within a lot of cases, just kind of lifting and shifting a data structure you've got on premise out to the cloud. There are some changes that you have to kind of look into. And so typically what we'll do with customers there is we'll kind of work through a pilot initially just to make sure the data you have and the workflows you have kind of fit that. But again, in a lot of cases, if you can make the leap, it really does modernize your file sharing, the way you do file sharing. Now, the next trend was an interesting one. So, yet again, a lot of us were caught um, fairly flat-footed when the pandemic first started. We've had a number of years now to adjust to it, but some of this still definitely applies. And a lot of organizations maybe didn't have personal devices for users to take home. Maybe they had PCs that sat in the office, or maybe they had computers for users to take home, but they maybe weren't powerful enough to do what they did in the office. So for instance, we talked to a couple engineering firms that while they had laptops deployed to their users, they had bought them to just allow users to do kind of, just typical office document work from home. They didn't really buy them to be um, workstations to run CAD tools on. They had that in the office. They had bought a large PC in the office to run that. So how in the world would you do things like CAD development, either from underpowered machines or again, bring your own device? Maybe somebody's just bringing their own device to bear. This is where things like Azure Virtual Desktops come into play. Azure Virtual Desktops is a multi-session cloud PC. So basically, users can remote into their virtual PC that's living in the cloud, get access to all of their applications and the like. And that provides a couple benefits. The first is if you're doing bring your own device, it provides a separation between the personal device and this virtual work PC. So you've got kind of this air gap between what's going on that personal device and what's going on in this cloud PC. But it also allows you to kind of augment capacity, like I mentioned in that engineering example. So you can scale not only out to kind of meet your needs, but up to meet your needs, including things like virtual video cards that allow you to run like high-end CAD tools within the cloud. Now, what I'm describing probably doesn't sound new to anybody. This has been around forever through solutions like Citrix and remote desktop services. The difference is it's on-demand capacity. So you don't have to go invest in this large environment that's just sitting there waiting for an emergency. You can spin these machines up as you need, and you pay for the capacity as you're using it versus just paying for it all the time. So it's kind of a nice little tool. Um, there is a consumption cost based on use. Think like electrical, like your electric bill. But a lot of the licensing that's required is included in other Microsoft 365 SKUs. So for instance, things like Microsoft 365 E3 or E5 include licensing to do virtual Azure virtual desktops, but you can also purchase that as a standalone license through what's called a VDA license. So it's very easy to kind of add this capacity again as you kind of need as the needs arise. Now, as more and more things are moving to the cloud, this is impacting the traditional data center as well. So we talk to customers that are facing an upgrade to their data center, and they're kind of looking around and going, what's left? We've moved email to the cloud, maybe we've moved file sharing to the cloud, we've moved telephony to the cloud, line of business apps are moving to the cloud. And they're kind of looking around with what's left and trying to figure out what to do. Maybe they would just like to augment capacity they've got on premise without making a big investment, or maybe they're just looking to get out of the on-premise data center business altogether. This has been especially prevalent in small and mid-sized organizations where they don't, the data center may really just be a closet in the office, and they may not have the conditioned power and the generators and the dual redundant internet feeds and things like that to get that done. And so Azure Infrastructure as a Service allows us to help with that particular scenario as well. So we can do things like build out and augment your existing capacity on premise, build out kind of a virtual data center, if you will, that connects back to your main data center. where you can spin up VMs as needed. We work with a tax preparation company, for instance, that seasonally they have a need to spin up a bunch of SQL servers and application servers to support their tax professionals. But that's needed, 5 or 6 months out of the year versus the entire year. You can augment that kind of need using Azure infrastructure as a service. But again, we can also just modernize, lift and shift, either lift and shift out to the cloud, take existing VMs, move them straight out to the cloud, or even do some modernization. So maybe take SQL servers on premise and migrate that data out to Azure SQL, and get even further benefits of the cloud. Maybe you're not ready to make that total leap, but maybe you are looking for a disaster recovery plan, and you can use disaster recovery as a service to help there, where basically we make copies of your on-premise virtual servers into Azure. And in the case of emergency, maybe a hurricane has rolled through and knocked the local data center down, not only do you have your data in an offsite location, but you have the ability to spin up the compute as needed to actually get back up and running. And so you can do that type of scenario as well. So a lot of ways to modernize or just even augment what you're doing in that traditional data center capacity. So these are kind of the main trends I wanted to talk through and spend a couple minutes just talking through why. Okay, great. Maybe some of these you've done, some of these you're interested in. Why us? Maybe you're new to InterVision, or maybe you've worked with InterVision for years, but you really haven't done anything with our Microsoft practice. And so, why should we use you guys? Really, the answer is pretty simple. We offer a full suite of services around the Microsoft stack. That's everything from the initial planning, whether that's high-level planning, helping you make the financial and strategic analysis of why to go with a cloud solution. Maybe it's a technical analysis, kind of doing a deep dive in a planning session, design session around how you can modernize a particular application. But once we kind of move beyond planning, we can help you do the full migration, everything from license sales up to the migration, the actual migrations themselves. And then we can get into helping you manage that long term. That comes through a couple means. The first is we offer a full service managed service suite. So the things we implement, we can manage. But the other thing is the cloud tends to be a journey. I mentioned I've been doing Microsoft solutions for years. We pivoted into the cloud when Microsoft first moved. So we've been doing this for about 10 years. We still talk to the first customers we moved to out to Office 365. Why? Because the needs change, right? The needs evolve. Additional solutions are needed. Maybe compliancy has become an issue. Maybe you're looking to move additional workloads out to the cloud. There's always something additional in there that we can help with, provide guidance and help you do those follow-on projects. So this does tend to be a very cyclical process, and our goal is to be your trusted advisor along that journey. Again, helping you with all of those stages. We don't want to be one and done. We really want to be with you through this entire journey to the cloud. If you're newer to InterVision, at this point, we've got around 550 employees spread out across 17 locations. Our engineers are some of the most certified you'll find. Individual certifications, we have over 700, and then we've got 160 just industry recognized certifications as a whole. Specifically on the Microsoft side, though, we have got 16 dedicated professional services engineers. These are folks who do Microsoft projects day in and day out. They may specialize in one or two areas. That could be Exchange or SharePoint or Teams or Intune or Azure. But they specialize, they do this daily. But in addition, we've got around 10 or so what I would refer to as co-sell engineers. These are folks from other disciplines that work with the Microsoft team to deliver holistic Microsoft solutions. So that's things like our security practice. We will do projects frequently with the security group where the security group will come in and help map out compliancy requirements to individual controls, and then we will help implement those within the Microsoft security stack. Or when it comes to Azure, we'll work with our networking team to provide very complex networking implementations. Microsoft kind of does in the cloud like they've done historically on premise, which is to say they work with the partner community to augment their own offerings. So there are things like Cisco virtual appliances, Meraki, et cetera, that we can set up in Azure and build very complicated networking interconnects back to your corporate structure. So you're not having to kind of sacrifice to move to the cloud. We work with our voice team to help with things like session border controllers for voice projects, or in the case of Teams room systems, we work with our AV team who can do things like site surveys and help plan out the appropriate room system for a particular room. So again, we try to utilize all of these skills we have. We're not a boutique Microsoft partner. We happen to be a full stack partner that has a very strong Microsoft practice within the organization. In addition, we've fairly recently added in developer capabilities as well through Virtuosity. So we can help with some of those platform as a service offerings, as well as the infrastructure offerings I've talked about today. We've got a group of dedicated project managers that do all of the Microsoft projects, so they're very familiar with how the flow of a SharePoint project is, or a Teams project, or an Azure project. They've got very specific skills around those. We've got a dedicated business analyst and an adoption specialist. I'll talk a little bit more about the adoption specialist in just a moment. As I mentioned, we also can do full managed services around the Microsoft solutions we offer, and we're a tier 1 CSP. CSP is a licensing program that Microsoft has that allows us to directly sell cloud licenses. These are things like Office 365 subscriptions, Azure subscriptions, but also a lot of the traditional software is now available through CSP as well. So we can actually sell things like Windows Server licensing for on-premise needs, or SharePoint server, or kind of anything you can think of. We can typically provide you a licensed solution through our CSP offering. We do have a 24/7, 365 availability in our managed service group, so we can, again, not only support this stuff, but we can support it all day long. This is handled through not only data centers spread throughout the US, but also data centers located overseas. So that's great. How do we get started? I mentioned earlier, we have one of the folks we have on staff. Let me take a step back. If you have specific projects in mind that you'd like to do, maybe something I mentioned, you're like, yep, that's something we absolutely want to do. Just reach out to your account manager, let them know what that area is, and we'll get the appropriate engineer assigned to talk that through with you. But maybe you're higher level than that. You've not done any Microsoft work with us. And you're just trying to figure out where to get started. And our adoption specialist can help with that. And there's a number of ways you can tap into him. The first kind of big area we use our adoption specialist is in licensing optimization. Again, I mentioned a lot of these journeys to the cloud are just that. They're journeys. They're not one and done kind of migrations. And so the licensing you purchase today may not be optimal for what you need 2 years from now. You may have just been bolting on one-off licenses, and there may be a suite or something that will provide you a better use case. And so we can take a look at your licensing, look at your upcoming projects, and provide some guidance around, hey, you could save money if you went to this particular license. We can also look at cases of where maybe you're not utilizing features you have. So just some education around, hey, did you know you own this license? This license includes these features. So we can do some of those kinds of training as well. We can deliver workshops, for instance, around things like security. A lot of times it's kind of hard to figure out how to wrap your arms around those kinds of things. We can do guided self-service projects through what's called fast track. If you hear that term, we are a fast track ready partner, which means we can provide guided self-service. So maybe there's a particular workload you're looking at implementing. You're planning on doing it yourself, but you've just got a few questions you want to bounce off of an expert. We provide those kinds of fast track, that guided self-service, for those needs. Um, the things I'm mentioning here are pretty much provided with at no cost, or they're provided through the cost of the licensing you're purchasing. While some of these aren't available to every customer, we can always look into and see, hey, these are the things you're eligible for. But a number of the services like the licensing optimizations, et cetera, we just provide to everybody. It's it's a service we want to offer because again, we're trying to build a relationship with you and be part of that journey that you're on to the cloud. So we want you to, we want to help make that as smooth as we possibly can. All right, so I have done like I tend to do on these when they're virtual. It's kind of, I'm talking to literally talking to the cloud. So I kind of blew through a little bit faster than I meant to do, but I've kind of come to the end. So at this point, if there are any questions out there, Jesse, have we gotten anything?
Not seeing any specific question. Oh, one just came in.
Okay.
Michael is asking, hold on, let me scroll down. Can InterVision provide proof of services to help guide us through the migration to Microsoft 365, G1 or G3 if we've purchased our M365 through a different vendor?
Yes. So we have purposely kept licensing and professional services separate. We're happy to provide both, but there's a lot of cases where we know we're not going to be the licensed vendor. That's going to be the case of like enterprise agreements, campus agreements, some of the government cloud agreements kind of fall into there. And so, yeah, we've purposely kept services separate, and that even includes some of those free services I mentioned. Some of those you'll still be eligible for even if you don't purchase licensing through us. But yeah, always happy to talk through and deliver managed services. In kind of the same vein, one of the other questions that may come up from time to time is, well, we've worked with another vendor, maybe we've got a managed service vendor we deal with, or we've worked with somebody on other pieces of Office 365, but maybe they don't have the experience with like Teams Voice, for instance. And we'd like to use you for that piece. Is it possible to just use you for those particular workflows? And the answer to that is also yes. We're happy to work together, not only with your IT organization, but whoever you're using for, as far as a partner within the partner space as well.
And we do have a follow-up question from Michael. What's the difference between CSP and AOSG programs from Microsoft? I believe you said InterVision is CSP.
We are CSP. I'm not exactly sure on AOSG, so I'd have to look that one up. So CSP is just a licensing vehicle, right? So Microsoft for years has had a number of licensing options. Those include everything from enterprise and campus agreements down to what they called open for kind of individual sale, and then of course retail. You could just run to Best Buy and buy licenses. CSP is a program that they opened up to partners that allow us to kind of buy licenses in bulk and then sell them to our customers. And it's kind of up to each partner to define how they're going to package and sell CSP licenses. So some will try to wrap service migration services and things in them. And again, back to that trying to maintain maximum flexibility, we kind of decided let's not do that. And instead, the approach we took is we kind of baked a managed service kind of offering in there. So we'll help with things like, move, add changes, deletes of licensing, the license optimization stuff I mentioned, basic questions and answers. So we kind of become that first line of support. If you've got questions, you need help. But we also have what's called advanced support for partners that allows us to escalate tickets on behalf of CSP customers within Microsoft. So it's kind of a way to help, if there's something we need to escalate, maybe it's a back-end issue, something we can't directly fix, we can then work to get that escalated within Microsoft.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. Oh, one more. Mike, oh, here we go. Rob, well, I'll read this out. It's a little bit of a longer one, so bear with
Okay.
me. Microsoft says that backup of the Microsoft Cloud offerings, Exchange Online, SharePoint, Teams, etc., is a shared responsibility between both Microsoft and the end user customers. While talking with other IT managers, it seems that some organizations are not doing any backups of the Microsoft Cloud services. Any thoughts on the importance of doing backups of the Microsoft Cloud data / should backups be to the cloud from cloud to cloud, or should backups be to on-prem servicers?
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting question. So, typically when you're thinking of backups, there's really two aspects to them. Disaster recovery and just the ability to recover data. Sites. Kind of sidebar there for a second, because that always kind of makes people cringe a little bit. One additional thing to note is data is locked to specific geographies. So when you first sign up for Office 365, if you say you're in the United States, the data will be replicated within US data centers, and similar rules then apply in other geographies. But data is replicated to multiple servers and multiple sites. So they are providing like the disaster recovery bit. They're also providing some level of data recovery. So depending on the platform, email, there's 30 days of deleted item retention and deleted mailbox retention. SharePoint, I think it's like 93 days of recycle bin that you can put in place there. So there is some data recovery baked in. The two things they're not, where the shared responsibility comes in is obviously anything outside of that, right? So if somebody comes to you 6 months from now and says, hey, I deleted something 6 months ago and it's the most important thing ever, Microsoft doesn't have anything outside of those that I mentioned to recover. Now, if you're using any sort of archiving tools, you may be able to pull that back through there, but just kind of that's another way you could potentially do that. But let's just take that off the table for the minute. You're not going to be able to reach out to Microsoft and ask them to pull something off a tape from 6 months ago or anything like that. The other thing, of course, is is ransomware attacks. There haven't really been cases yet of ransomware jumping into Outlook or jumping into a browser to like SharePoint data, but OneDrive data is something to really be concerned about, because it's a folder that's sitting on the local machine and then replicates to the cloud. So if ransomware gets on a PC and it encrypts the data that's on OneDrive, that could get replicated out to the cloud. Then what can you do? So depending on what services you're using, somewhat depends on, do you absolutely need another backup tool or not in that space? But if the answer to that question is yes, Microsoft doesn't directly provide backup solutions, but there are third parties that do. It's the names you kind of expect, people like Barracuda and Veeam, and some other ones that maybe you've never heard of before, like Keepit and Skykick. But we work with several vendors in that space. I personally like the cloud to cloud backup solutions just because they tend to follow that cloud model, but there are some on-premise options as well. The one thing to be aware of is there's a backup API Microsoft providing to all vendors that is kind of forcing, it basically limits the functionality to all vendors to basically the same place. So on premise, there's some secret sauce between like a Veeam or another provider. It's a little more limited in the cloud. But yeah, that's one of those things. If you want to talk a little more, just reach out to your account manager. I'd love to jump on a call and we can talk through options in more detail there.
Awesome. Thanks, Rob. That's all the questions I'm seeing for right now. I'll give people another minute or so. We've got a couple people saying great job. And you did segue nicely. I just want to bring to everyone's attention earlier, both Toby and Molly gave their contact information if you wish to reach out to them. So please scroll through the Q&A feature to see their emails and phone numbers. Outside of that, I am not seeing any more questions, just more praise for you, Rob. So thank you. Thank you everyone for joining us. Again, we are recording this session, so we will be sure to send out a copy of that. But thank you all, and thank you, Rob.
Yeah, no problem. Look forward to talking to you all in the future.
Awesome. Thanks.
Take care.